The Seven Wonders of Sassafras Springs. Chapter 9. Day 9. Change of Plans. Aunt Pretty was so anxious to hear what I was up to, she pestered me all through dinner to tell her the story. When I finally told her and Pa about Uncle Alf, she was even more interested, especially after I said he'd asked about her. I never knew Alfred carved that little village. That would be something to see. Aunt Pretty sat on the edge of her rocker. Her hands were still for once. Alfred? You call him Alfred? I was amazed. Goodness, I've known him my whole life, Aunt Pretty said. I never saw that little village, though. Why don't you call on him, Pretty? I recall you two were friendly at one time, Paul suggested with a sly grin. I think I'll do that, Aunt Pretty declared. I'll bake him an apple pie. I bet it's been years since Alfred had a homemade apple pie. It's a rough road to his house, I warned her. You'd have to be a mule to make it. Aunt Pretty laughed. I've been down plenty of rough roads, even, and I'm as stubborn as a mule. You know that. I could see she was determined. Wear your blue dress when you go, I suggested. I like that dress. My aunt's face turned pink. I'm just going to go see the carvings. Maybe I'll see if that dress is clean. She started to go inside, then came right back. Lord, I got so caught up in hearing about Alfred, I forgot I had something important to tell you, Eben. What? I went down and made a long distance telephone call today, she announced proudly. That got my attention, since we didn't have a phone. The locals all went to Youth's General to make their calls. Hiram charged them a pretty penny to do so. But long distance? I called Cousin Lottie in St. Louis. She's a second cousin on my mother's side. She worked for some rich folks there till she got married. Now she's got a house in the city and a couple of kids younger than you. Even. Anyway, she said she'd be plain delighted to have you visit her week after next. Says she misses having kinfolk around. I could not believe the words coming out of Aunt Pretty's mouth. I haven't seen Lottie in years, not since the funeral, said Paul, lowering his voice at the thought of my mother passing. I remember Cousin Lottie, big and friendly, with braids that wound around her head like friendly snakes. St. Louis, I half whispered. Can I go, Pa? Well, if your aunt went all to that trouble of making a phone call, I should say so. I can hire Buck Fielding to work for a couple of days. He's always happy to earn a little extra. So there it was, St. Louis, Missouri. There had to be some wonders of the world there. Why, they'd already had a World's Fair. And there were tall buildings and a zoo, museums and cathedrals, and even the mighty, muddy Mississippi River with a famous bridge across it. A fellow who'd been to St. Louis would never be the same again. The next morning I woke up to the smell of apples and cinnamon drifting through my window. By the time I got downstairs for breakfast, Aunt Pretty was covering an apple pie with a towel. I saw that she was wearing her blue dress, freshly washed and ironed, and there was a brand new band of crocheted lace around her collar. Thought I'd mosey on down to Alfred's early, she explained. He could have some pie for breakfast. Maybe you ought to take along your clothespin people, Pa suggested. Not this time, not yet, she said mysteriously. Then Pa did something else shocking. He offered her a ride in the pickup. No thanks, I'll enjoy the walk, Aunt Pretty told him. Say howdy for me, Pa said. You look mighty nice. My stars, hard as it was to believe, as my aunt traveled down the road, she did look real nice. And if my aunt was actually pretty, well, that might be another wonder of Sassafras Springs. Looks like Alf D's going to get your aunt's apple pie at least, said Pa as he watched her walk away. You could have knocked me over with a feather. You mean he was one of the ones who lost out on Holt? Pa just winked his answer. Maybe Uncle Alf was carving up a wedding scene right now. After all, like Pa said, Aunt Pretty was still in her prime. Maybe Uncle Alf was going to be somebody's uncle after all, and that somebody could be me. I hayed with Pa most of the morning. That's a happy tune, Pa said as he tossed a pitchfork of hay up on the wagon, where I was waiting to spread it out. I hadn't noticed I was whistling. Later, I laughed out loud when I gazed up at old Redhead Hill. From up there on the wagon, if you looked a certain way, the two houses on the hill appeared to be a pair of eyes staring out from under a mop of red hair. I never noticed that before, I told Pa. He chuckled. Depends on your point of view. While Pa ate his lunch, I grabbed my sandwich and gobbled it down on the way to Jeb's house. I couldn't wait a second longer to tell him the news. He was out in the cornfield eating lunch with his brothers and sisters and his pa. He ran up to meet me. I heard you're going to St. Louis, he greeted me. Lucky you. I wanted to know how on earth he could know that before I told a soul. Oh, everybody knows it. Your pa told Buck Fielding, and it spread from there. Say, Hiram Youth went to St. Louis once and said they've got streetcars going down the middle of the street that run on an electrical wire, set off sparks everywhere, like red hot snowflakes. Red hot snowflakes? Now that's a wonder I didn't want to miss. I worked extra hard the next week, maybe because I was hoping Pa would miss me when I was gone. I already knew I'd miss him. On the afternoon before I left, Sal stretched her legs and looked up at me hopeful like. I could see she was itching to go searching for more wonders. We're finished with all that now, I told her, but she just wagged her tail. Oh, I guess it won't hurt to keep looking, I said, as she led me out to Yellow Dog Road and to more wonders of Sassafras Springs.